In the heart of Nyanika, a once beautiful land, known for its lush forest, rich soils, and clear rivers, there was a place where nature and people thrived in harmony. The mighty Asunu River, snaking through the valleys, provided water for the people, crops, and wildlife. It was the lifeblood of the nation. Nyanika's people were humble, relying on farming, fishing, and the forest for survival. They were very content. Their lands had sustained them for generations. However, greed began to brew beneath the surface, threatening to unravel everything. One day, whispers of gold beneath the soil spread through the village, carried on the tongues of travelers and foreign merchants. Beneath the rich farmlands and the flowing Asunu lay glittering veins of gold. At first, the people of Nyanika paid no heed. The river and the soil were enough, but soon powerful eyes turned towards their land. The chiefs, guardians of the people's heritage, were approached by men in suits, politicians from the capital, and foreign businessmen with smooth tongues. They spoke of wealth beyond imagination, a future where Nyanika could rival the richest nations. All they needed was the land, a little sacrifice for endless riches. The chiefs, enticed by the promises and blinded by greed, sold the land of their ancestors. At the heart of this betrayal was President Kudala, a man whose name would forever be etched in the annals of Nyanika's tragic history. Kudala was a proud and arrogant leader who had long reigned over the country with an iron fist. To the world, he presented himself as a leader of progress, a man determined to bring wealth to his nation. But beneath the veneer of patriotism lay a heart consumed by selfish ambition and cruelty. When the gold in Nyanika was discovered, he saw not the danger to the people or the land, but a fortune that could be seized for himself and his loyal allies. As soon as the mining began, the people saw their lives changing before their eyes. The Asunu River, their precious lifeline, became polluted, and the land grew barren. Fearing for their future, the villagers, led by the elders and youth, began to organize protests. They marched through the streets of the capital and stood outside the palaces of the chiefs, demanding an end to Galamsey. They cried out for protection of their lands, for their children's future, and for the sacred Asunu River. "Save Nyanika, save the river," they shouted as their voices echoed through the valleys. But President Kudala would not hear them. He viewed the protests not as the cries of a desperate people, but as a challenge to his authority. To him, the wealth pouring in from the gold mines mattered more than the lives of the villagers. Angered by their defiance, Kudala ordered the arrest of anyone who dared speak against the mining. He branded the protesters as enemies of progress, accusing them of standing in the way of Nyanika's bright future. The government soldiers, clad in black uniforms and armed with batons and rifles, descended upon the villages. They beat the protesters, breaking bones and spirits alike. Young men and women who had once stood proudly in defense of their land were dragged through the dirt and thrown into prison cells. Some were never seen again. The elders, the very keepers of Nyanika's wisdom, were silenced, their pleas ignored by the chiefs who had been bought with riches. President Kudala stood on national television, his broad figure draped in gold-embroidered robes, speaking to the nation. These protests, he said with a chilling calm, are a betrayal of Nyanika's future. We are building a new dawn, and there will be no room for those who cling to the past. His words were met with applause from his loyal followers, but in the villages, there was only despair. With the protesters silenced and the leaders of the opposition imprisoned, the Galamsey intensified. Machines tore deeper into the earth, stripping it bare. The Asunu River grew darker, its once clear waters now blackened by chemicals, and still President Kudala celebrated the wealth pouring into his coffers. But it wasn't for long before the price of his greed began to show in ways he could no longer ignore. As the land withered, so did the hope of the people. A once united community was now broken. Some men, driven by desperation, joined the miners. They took up shovels and pickaxes, hoping to dig their way out of poverty. But they, too, were swallowed by the greed of Galamsey. The foreign companies paid them little, and the land they toiled on no longer yielded crops. Soon, there was nothing left. In the final years, the Asunu River dried completely, leaving a cracked and barren riverbed behind. With it, the last vestiges of life in Nyanika disappeared. The forest had been cut down, the soil poisoned, and the people left as shadows of their former selves, drained of life, just like the river. The chiefs, once respected leaders, were despised by their own people, their wealth useless in the face of devastation. They had rout. The politicians who had promised prosperity had long abandoned Nyanika, leaving it to rot. Nyanika, once a land of abundance, became a ghost land. Only the whispers of wind across the barren land and the crumbling homes told the stories of what had been lost. As the years passed, hope for renewal began to fade completely. Families tried to rebuild what they could, planting what little crops remained on the fringes of the poisoned land. But the damage was too deep. The poison in the soil did not stay buried. It flowed into the blood of the people. Soon, a new horror emerged. The children born after the devastation were not like those of before. Babies were born with twisted limbs, missing fingers, and eyes clouded with blindness. Others had weakened lungs, barely able to draw breath, their tiny bodies fighting against an unseen force. The midwives wept as they cradled their newborns, their innocence shattered by the sins of the past. It became clear that the poisons used in the gold mining, the mercury and the cyanide that bled into the land and the river, had entered the people. The very soil of Nyanika, once fertile and giving, now cursed its own people. The deformities, the illnesses, all could be traced back to Galamsey. The greed of the chiefs and the politicians had not only destroyed the land, but poisoned future generations. The mothers who had once hoped to see their children grow strong now watched helplessly as they withered, their frail bodies marked by the scars of a past they did not create. Doctors came from the capital. Foreign aid groups arrived, but it was too late. The damage could not be undone. The people of Nyanika were left with a future of sickness, deformity, and sorrow. No wealth, no gold could reverse what had been done. The chiefs and the politicians who had sold the land were nowhere to be found. They lived in distant countries, their wealth untouched by the sufferings they had caused. In the end, the country of Nyanika was left to mourn not just for the loss of her rivers and dead crops, but for the children who carried the weight of the past in their fragile bodies. And as the sun set on the barren land, the people of Nyanika wept, knowing their homes would never be the same again. Greed had taken everything from the land, from the people, and now from the future. The last river of Nyanika had run dry, and with it the soul of the land died too.